So,
Saw Precious, Joe?
I did, George.
And you had seen it before now, right? Like you saw it in theaters when it came out in 2009.
I did indeed.
And despite that, you didn't see fit to warn what I was in for?
I thought you would enjoy a surprise.
A surprise? The poor child in this movie is subjected to one tragedy after another. A little heads up would have been nice. We should probably have a content warning to open the show.
We could, but maybe any listener not familiar with this motion picture might also enjoy a little surprise.
Jesus. I knew you were fucked up when you laughed at the baby in the garbage bag from Just Another Girl on the IRT, but this is too much.
What? I didn't say this movie was a comedy.
It's beyond not a comedy. This movie flew 2 planes into comedy. My divorce and my mom's funeral had more laughs. The last time I found a film this depressing, I was at the United States Holocaust Museum.
You've never been to the Holocaust Museum.
True. But if I had gone, seeing this picture afterwards wouldn't have helped my mood any.
Hey, the nice thing about cinema like this is most people can say, man, I thought my family was fucked up, but they ain't nothing like this. Welcome to Does This Still Work? The podcast looks at old movies and asks, does this still work? I'm Joe Dixon.
And I'm George Romaka. And today we're discussing Precious from 2009 and some historical context. First, podcasty stuff. You can reach us at dtswpod@gmail.com, on Facebook, or on Letterboxd. Please tell your friends about us and leave 5-star ratings everywhere. You can pick what we watch and get extra per episode content by funding us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/dtswpod. So Joe, take us back to 2009.
There is a lot in this movie. Some say too much. The teenage character, Precious, has to endure so much trauma, some reviewers found it unrealistic. Something we can discuss once we get into the movie. Right now, let's do a little history and see what the journalism from 2009 was writing about some of the subjects our little picture here covers. We will start with race. The publication I got this from is called The Times Colonist. It's a Canadian newspaper, but I don't think that will matter much. George, what's the headline?
Study looks at racial bias. Training people to view other race faces as individuals disrupts stereotypes.
13 years ago, researchers at the University of Victoria claimed their new facial recognition study would break down racial stereotypes. The study went this way. Subjects were shown pictures of people from a number of different races. The subjects were also shown words, both positive and negative. Researchers found subjects responded faster to an African American face when combined with a negative word. But after that test, 24 people had 10 hours of facial recognition training, which showed them how to differentiate African American faces and view them individually.
I wonder if they can finally get around to doing that for like facial recognition software.
The study concluded that people trained to view faces individually instead of as a part of a racial group show better recognition skills and less bias. Psychology researcher Jim Tanaka was involved in the study, and I'm going to quote him now. Remember, this is from 2009, so Barack Obama was president for 1 year at this point. Tanaka said Barack Obama's presidency could also have implications for facial recognition procedures and break down racial stereotypes. With the recent events with Obama, it's going to be an interesting real-life experiment in which we're bound to see more African-American people in the news that will be asked to individuate, he said. That's got to have positive effects on the way we perceive African-Americans, but also improve our ability to kind of differentiate African-Americans and diminish stereotyping, end quote. George, do you think today we have less stereotyping, more, or about the same?
Slightly less, but what is there is more intractable than it used to be.
I think that makes sense, sure.
I'm glad, because I wasn't sure when I said it.
No, I mean, I get it. Yeah, they're, especially the younger folks, are accustomed to seeing black faces. Something, as a 55-year-old growing up, I didn't see that many on TV or magazines or movies or anything.
Nope.
And so, yeah, there's more than ever. And that's part of the backlash that we experienced, although thankfully not in the midterms, but still we had a backlash among white people because they're afraid they're not seeing enough white faces on the TV for their comfort. And they think the blacks and the Jews and the Asians and the et cetera, are all just taking over and doing what to them, I have no idea. But that seems to be the Jews are not replaces crowd, which is a lot of people in this country, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's move on. This next story, I can absolutely say nothing has changed. The numbers may be different, but the situation is exactly the same today as it was yesterday. We will get this information from the Herald Sun in Durham, North Carolina. Read the headline, George.
Food stamp belt. Race, politics, poverty in the South.
I'm now going to quote. The New York Times ran an eye-opening story last month about the 36 million people in this country who depend on food stamps. With food stamps use at record highs and climbing every month, a program once scorned as a failed welfare scheme now helps feed 1 in 8 Americans and 1 in 4 children. While food stamp use has grown more rapidly in other areas, the South, which came into the recession with a higher number of recipients, still claims a disproportionate share. Of the 100 counties nationwide with the highest percent of whites on food stamps, over half, 52, are in 3 states, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. Over 70% of white West Virginians are on food stamps, the highest rate in the country, end quote. This article also mentions the number of blacks on food stamps and points out that while those people vote Dems, the whites on food stamps vote for Republicans. And not just Republicans, but Republicans who are anti-government and anti-food stamps. With that in mind, the article includes, quoting, how do you convince whites in red states who evidently will put aside ideology and use programs like food stamps and they think it's best for their families to similarly embrace other safety net and government programs? End quote. George, I am now going to move on to this. Now, I grew up as a welfare kid, as you know, meaning someone raised by a single mother on welfare. I think the system gets a bad rap, and this movie does nothing to help that. This is our second film about a black woman on welfare. The first was Claudine, a very different film. In this flick, it is strongly implied that welfare has made the mother in this movie lazy, not only not interested in work, but encourages her daughter to also go on welfare. Now listen, welfare helped keep my family alive, and I'm very happy it was there, however shitty the caseworkers were to us. And they were awful. My mom had 8 of us, not all from the same father. We've all grown up and none of us are on welfare. Some of us went to college. All of us have jobs. Some of us are even married and raising children. Social safety nets like welfare and food stamps have bad reputations, even among those using them, like whites in red states. So, George, this wasn't just true in 2009, it's true now. How do we change that?
Joe, if I knew how to answer that, we'd have already done it because I'm not the smartest guy on the planet, and someone smarter would have already figured out how to do that.
And finally, sexual abuse is a driving force behind the plot of this movie. I got this information from a publication called The Daily Advertiser. Headline, please.
Sexual assault remains largely unreported. You're sure this is from 2009? Because
I know. Another thing that hasn't changed much, right? I'm not going to quote from this article. I think we know the stats, including every 2 minutes someone becomes a victim of sexual assault. What I do want to mention from this article is sexual abuse of men against their daughters. Weirdly, George, something you once said to me about incest porn applies here.
It's weird for me to think that I said something relevant about that now shows up in one of our movies, Joe, but okay.
Okay, well,
apparently I knew a thing once.
Yes, you see, you told me that there is so much incest porn because it's easier to come up with scenarios. Rather than having a pizza guy or a cable guy drop by, just make it the stepfather or brother because that makes access easier. Turns out, this is exactly what's going on with guys who molest their own children, specifically men going after their daughters. What the article mentions is the mother getting sick and the father replaces his wife with his daughter.
Ugh.
This isn't in the piece we have linked in the show notes, but my knowledge of history tells me this is not unusual. Sigmund Freud, as one example, did this. He never sexually abused his daughter Anna, but he did use her as a surrogate wife. It's something guys do, or at least used to do. I presume still do in some places. What do you think, George?
So this kind of speaks to what was mentioned way earlier about how the trauma in this is so unrelenting that people think it couldn't be real. Which, again, this was a novel. This was not a biography. This was not a biopic of anything. This was not a overheard story. This was a novel. But given the history of human beings and the history of the way men have seen every non-man in their life as their property, I have no problem believing that men have done shit like this for all of history.
Oh, no. I think what people found unrealistic is not that a man would do that to his daughter. Unfortunately, that's too realistic. The point is that, and as we'll list as we'll get into the movie, all the other atrocities that happened to her just seems like a bit much. Well, we'll get into it, but I think I agree with
just keep on coming.
Yeah, it's too much.
Maybe. The movie does take place over the course of almost a year.
Anyway, George, tell us about Precious.
This was directed by Lee Daniels.
Lee Daniels was the director of The United States versus Billie Holiday, which I enjoyed. I never watched Empire. That's a show that he produced and was a really hot TV show there for a while.
This is based on a novel by Sapphire.
Never read the novel, which is called Push, by the way.
Mm-hmm. And Sapphire. You know, if you're going to have one of those one-word names, that's a good one.
I guess.
I like that one. The screenplay was by Jeffrey Fletcher.
Not familiar with his work.
For the Academy Awards, this won an Oscar for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role for Monique, and Best Writing Adapted Screenplay for Gregory Fletcher, who became the first African American to win a Best Screenplay Oscar.
In what year was this?
2010.
Amazing. It's 2010, and they finally get a Best Screenplay Oscar to a black person. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Take your time, folks. No rush.
It was nominated for Best Motion Picture of the Year. Whew. The thought of this being the best movie, like, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad movie, but do you want this to be the representative of movies of that year? Best Performance by an Actress in a Leading Role for Gabri Sidibe. Best Achievement in Directing for Lee Daniels, and Best Achievement in Film Editing for Joe Klotz. This also won a Golden Globe for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role for Monique, and was nominated again for Best Motion Picture Drama and Best Performance by an Actress in a Motion Picture Drama for, again, Gabri Sidibe. Blurbs. For the record, no blurb can prepare you for this film.
By the way, before you read the blurbs, so even after watching the film, you still don't remember ever hearing anything about it?
No.
Okay. Yeah, you were very much, well, obviously you were around in 2009. Really surprised you hadn't heard of this movie. Anyway, go ahead.
IMDb says, in New York City's Harlem circa 1987, an overweight, abused, illiterate teen who is pregnant with her second child is invited to enroll in an alternative school in hopes that she can reroute her life in a better direction. Okay, good enough.
Yeah, sure.
Amazon says, viciously abused by her mother and pregnant by her father, Harlem teen Precious Jones has an unexpected chance at a different life when she enrolls in an alternative school. An alternative school is not the type that teaches you alternative facts. That concept came about much later.
Mm-hmm. Well, by the way, did we know this is an alternative school because she only has one class she has to go to with one teacher?
Yep.
That's an alternative, all right.
And there's only like 12 students in the class.
Yeah.
In Manhattan.
I mean, honestly, if our classes were like this, the kids would do a lot better.
Yeah, there's a lot to say for student-teacher ratios in this film. We'll get there. We'll start with the Joneses, with Clarice Precious Jones, a teenager in just the worst circumstances of abuse from every angle that she could suffer from. Even though this is from a novel, I cannot help but believe that there are kids living just like this all over. Played by Gabri Sidibe.
This is the only thing I've seen this woman in.
And this was her first acting credit.
It is, yeah. What a debut. Can you imagine getting hired for this? Hey, this is your first actor. Oh, great. What am I going to play? Well, you're going to be illiterate. Oh, okay. And you're going to be pregnant twice. Oh, okay. And you're going to be raped by your dad.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
They just keep piling on stuff. Like, oh, wow, already. Gonna really have to do some serious acting choices here.
Then we have Mary, a woman with a horrible abusive mentality, played by Monique.
I don't know any of her other work.
And I saw her in one episode of Nip Tuck.
Okay.
Then we have Carl, who's just a fucking absolute monster, played by Rodney Bear Jackson.
We don't actually hear his voice, right? He never speaks in the entire... We never actually hear him speak in the entire film.
We do.
We do?
We do a little bit. Yeah, at the time that you don't want to ever hear it.
Oh, right. I forgot about that. Anyway, his IMDb says he was an Inside Man, which we saw for episode 65, Bamboozled, which we saw for episode 57, and 25th Hour, which I saw, but we didn't watch for this podcast.
Was 25th Hour also a Spike Lee joint?
It was indeed.
Okay, then we found the connecting thread.
Although weirdly, Spike Lee had nothing to do with this film.
Nope. Then we have Grandma Tootsie. She's a monster too, but she keeps it under control and acts like she's better than her daughter and granddaughter, even though she taught her daughter all of the wrong things. Played by Aunt Dot.
What kind of name is Aunt Dot?
The kind of name that someone has if they are the sister of one of your parents.
And if they're not?
Good question, Joe.
I got nothing else. That's the only thing I have for that. Why is this woman named that?
Then we have Mongo. Mongo is Precious' first child with Down syndrome. The name is short for Mongoloid, and this is the last time I'll refer to that child by that name. For the rest of this summary, I will refer to this character by the young actress's first name, played by Keisha Powell.
And this is the only film this kid has been in. By the way, there is no way Precious is going to keep calling her kid that. I just did not believe that at all. They can call it Mongo from Mongol. Give me a break. Otherwise, she would have given the kid up. Why would you just committing more abuse of this poor child by calling her something like that?
And then we have Abdul, Precious's second child, included here for completeness sake, played by Kendall Toombs, Alexander Toombs, and Corey Davis. And I'll save Joe the trouble here. This is the only credit listed for all three of these infant actors. They'll be on the cusp of their teenage years as of this recording, so time will tell if we see them again. Then we have some teachers and school faculty, starting with Mr. Witcher. He's apparently a good influence, and Precious crushes on him. Played by Bill Sage.
I've heard him on the podcast, you must remember this. He played the writer Larry McMurdy. I also saw him on an episode of Elementary. He was also in the movies I Shot Andy Warhol, The Unbelievable Truth, and for this podcast, we saw him in Sidewalk Stories, episode 115.
Do you remember what he was doing in that movie?
He was just a minor character. He was like selling hot dogs.
Okay. Then we have Mrs. Lichtenstein, the principal of the public school that Precious attends for the first few minutes. Played by Neala Gordon.
She was in The United States versus Billie Holiday. And that's it. That's all I got for her.
Then we have Miss Rain. Seems to be the only teacher at the alternative school that Precious is sent to. We'll get there. Played by Paula Patton.
I've seen her in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol.
I saw her in the World of Warcraft movie as the half-orc assassin Garona Halforsen.
Okay. Two very different roles. Three, really.
And we'll end with some social workers. First one is social worker. All one word, for some reason. She is the home visit and be lied to type of social worker. Played by Grace Hightower.
I've seen her in nothing.
And finally, Miss Vice. She does what good she can from within her cubicle. Played by Mariah Carey.
This is the only person on this list who I'll be hearing right after Thanksgiving and before New Year's. It's Mariah Carey, everybody, which means all she wants for Christmas is you. In terms of her acting, she was in Batman Lego Movie, which I kind of enjoyed.
And I saw her as herself in You Don't Mess with the Zohan. So, the first lines are narrated by the protagonist, Clarice Precious Jones, as she sits in her math class, typical of what films depict as inner-city public classrooms. Her second line invokes colorism as part of her desired traits in a boyfriend. I'm guessing that the abuse we'll see her subjected to has, in part, sold her on her own dark skin being some kind of bad. The remaining lines invoke the song Don't Stand So Close to Me by The Police regarding her teacher, Mr. Witcher. She likes math, but doesn't speak up in class, ever. She's called into the principal's office, where Mrs. Lichtenstein asks if she's pregnant again. She is. The principal asks how that happened and gets, "I had sex" as an answer, though that's not how anyone in the know would describe it. It reminds me of when my ex and I told my mother that we were expecting our first, and my mother asked that same question. My grandfather looked up from his vodka and said, "They had sex, Michelle." I love that story.
Yes, you do. You tell it all the time.
I never get to reference it so directly.
I know. I did think of you when she did that.
Mrs. Lichtenstein expels Precious because being pregnant is a crime, apparently.
Yeah, none of that makes any sense. First of all, I don't know how she knows she's pregnant again. As a kid who went to public school, not in Harlem, not at the time, I never attended a Harlem school, but I went in Brooklyn. I went in poor schools in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy. And there were definitely girls who sometimes would find up pregnant. They would ask about the boy who got you. If you were sent to another school, it was because you were pregnant and you went to school where other girls are also pregnant, because there are issues involved, obviously.
Yeah.
And having a child is going to disrupt your ability to learn because you're going to be out of school a lot to deal with that. So I get that. So she probably would be sent somewhere else. But the way they do it, yeah, it seems like she's more being punished than it is to help her.
Yeah.
The principal will be asking, well, who's the boy? Does he attend here? There'd be more than like, oh, you're pregnant again. Well, all right. La-di-dee, la-di-da.
Then we see how Precious got pregnant, by whom, and who was watching when it happened. In order, those are Carl, her father, and Mary, her mother. And this is when, if you didn't know before you started watching, you realize that you are in for a bad time.
A very bad time.
During this assault, and during other stressful moments, Precious mentally retreats into a fantasy life of fame and celebrity where she is adored by all. Of available coping mechanisms, it's probably one of the better ones.
It's true, yeah. She never does drugs or get drunk or anything. Although you wouldn't blame her if she did.
Nope. At home, Precious narrates that if the doorbell rings, it's 100% going to be crackheads whose activities involve smoking crack and ringing doorbells.
Well, they went in the building so they can smoke the crack. It's hard to smoke crack outside because the cops get involved.
The doorbell rings, and it is not a crackhead.
Well, we don't know that.
We do, because we watched the movie, Joe.
We don't know what she does in her off time.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Although she's white, so it's probably powder rather
Well, cocaine rather than crack.
Well, I mean, she's white and she's a principal, right? So that's cocaine levels, I guess. I don't fucking know. I don't think principals make all that much either. It's Mrs. Lichtenstein who, in consultation with Mr. Witcher, has arranged for her to go to an alternative school, meeting in a hotel starting tomorrow, which that sounds kind of sketchy just from the get-go.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen anything like that. They would have to talk to her mother. They would have to sit down and talk with her. You just don't transfer someone to another school without letting them know at the last minute. Like, okay, tomorrow you're attending this school. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, no, the mechanism by which this happened is unbelievable, but my oldest and my youngest bonus kid went to a high school that was inside of another high school.
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't inside a hotel. Which, by the way, Hotel Teresa, as far as I know, does not have a school in there. As someone who currently lives in Harlem, I'm unfamiliar with this.
This alternative school is called Each One Teach One, which is a saying from when enslaved Africans in the U.S. would, if they learned to read, teach another to do so as well, in defiance of the enslavers.
Because, ladies and gentlemen, despite what the right wing may tell you, it wasn't illegal for a slave to own a gun. It was illegal for a slave to read.
Yeah. If you didn't gather from Mary watching earlier, she's not one to be concerned at all for her daughter's welfare. She's only concerned about her own welfare, and she takes that literally, seeing an education opportunity for her daughter as a threat to her welfare check. Mary explicitly blames Precious for, well, everything. In this specific context, it's bringing a white woman, Mrs. Lichtenstein, into their business. Precious uses her active imagination to imagine things like the photos in her photo album talking to her, like one of her mother from years ago, telling Precious that she is loved. This is immediately contrasted with what her mother screams up the stairs at her.
Take your ass down to the welfare! Who the fuck she thinks she is? So I guess you think you're cute now, right? Oh, uppity bitch. Just because he gonna give you more children than he gives me, you think you something fucking special? Fuck you and fuck him!
That is so wrong. So wrong.
You think?
Who the fuck thinks that their father is gifting them with children, or that their partner is gifting their child with more children, or any of that? My sweet summer child self wrote that while watching, not knowing how deep and disgusting a rabbit hole this is.
Oh, yes. Oh, by the way, I don't know what Harlem apartment this is, but I would like it. They have it upstairs? What do they got, like a main room and then there's an upstairs? What apartment is this? Forget Harlem. Anywhere in the city, who's living like this? If you got an apartment where you have an upstairs in your apartment, you have one expensive apartment, at least in New York City.
All right.
Am I focusing on the wrong thing?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't think I've been in an apartment in Manhattan that had an upstairs to it, so I can't say either way. In the morning, Precious shows up for day 0 of her new school. To their credit, her former teacher and principal had sent all the required school paperwork in advance, which was a bit of a pleasant surprise. Like, when the secretary said, "Oh yeah, you need your discharge papers from the other school," I paused the movie and I wrote notes like, how the fuck was that not taken care of already?
Hey, gotcha.
Next sentence, they're like, "Oh, your teachers already took care of that." Oh, cool. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Shut you up.
Yep. She's also required to bring a household budget and utility bills, which I thought for sure was going to cause a problem, but doesn't.
Yeah, that's one of the few times she doesn't have a problem. She'll get plenty more, but that isn't one of them.
Day 0 is the TAB, or what I think is the Testing and Aptitude Battery.
There's always something wrong with these testers. These testers paint a picture of me with no brain. These testers paint a picture of me and my mother. My whole family is less than dumb. Just ugly black grease to be wiped away. Finding a job for. Sometimes I wish I was dead. I'd be okay, I guess. 'Cause I'm looking up. Looking up for a piano to fall. A desk, couch, TV, mama maybe. Always something in my way.
Now, testing is complicated. On one hand, it's necessary to gauge curriculum successes in measurable, quantifiable ways. On the other, the measures and quantities tend to be chosen in ways that perpetuate systemic inequalities that obscure addressable problems at the individual level. Also, about a TV falling, that is some foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
On the way home, she is catcalled and shoved to the ground by a feral pack of teenage boys. And Joe, don't you just hate waking up from a nice sex dream only to find yourself in a strange place with a dog licking you?
Can't say I've ever actually had that happen to me, but obviously it happens to her in this movie.
That happens in a lot of movies and TV shows, too. It's weird. Somebody's having a sex dream and they wake up to a dog licking them.
Yeah, which I don't think ever actually happens. Yeah, they're just feral kids, I think is a good word for it. What I don't understand is, this is difficult because I'm not a girl, and I've definitely been harassed when I was a teenage boy by other teenage boys, and they would do shitty things. I don't know that they would do that to a girl. I mean, they would definitely do sexto, "Hey, baby, how about blah, 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 blah." I don't think a guy would go over and shove her, but I don't know. It's not something I've seen, but that doesn't mean it couldn't have happened.
Yeah. The next morning, Precious asks her mother for money and is told instead to come do sex stuff with her mother.
Yeah, here's another on top of already horrific stuff going on. Oh, my mother's also abusing me. This is where people are like, okay, this is way too much.
But that's the thing, right? They're seeing, like, this character's life unfold right now over a specific period of time, whereas from what we will hear later, this has been going on forever.
No, without a question. But it's very rare. Obviously, it happens, but it's very rare for a father to be abusing a daughter and then the mother also be abusing her in this fashion.
I hope so, Joe. I really hope, for the sake of people, that it's rare. Before she leaves for school, she looks in the mirror and imagines herself as a white woman. Don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, it's called self-loathing.
Well, I mean, like, none of her problems are really directly a response to her being black.
Well, is it? I mean, well, let's look at her point of view. The vast majority of her teachers are white. The people she sees on TV are white. The people she fantasizes about are white. So yeah, she's like, oh, if only I were a white woman, my life would be better. Because just looking at what's going on the TVs that she watches and the shows that she enjoys, and the people who are teaching her, their lives are certainly better than hers.
All right, that's fair. Yeah. Again, representation matters.
Indeed.
So, with no money and hungry, Precious sets off for her first day of school. She stops at a fried chicken joint and does a dine and dash because kids gotta eat, but you can never show your face in that place again. They're gonna remember your face.
For sure.
And it wasn't far from where you were going to school.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to pass there again. They're going to see you.
It wasn't a good tactical decision.
That restaurant, by the way, no longer exists.
Aw.
Probably because people are going and dining and dashing in it.
Yeah. So in a hallway, she waits and then vomits into a trash can because morning sickness. Well, at least we knew she was pregnant before that moment. Miss Rain sees her there and unhelpfully tells her that time's a-wasting.
Yeah, she's like one of the better characters in this, and yet her behavior sometimes are like, would a hug hurt? With some, it's really weird.
Just you know why kids come to your school. Maybe don't admonish them for sitting down immediately upon meeting them.
Yes. And you must smell that vomit in the trash can. It's right there when you go buy your soda, whatever the hell she's doing when she comes out there and sees Precious sitting there.
Mm-hmm. Then she more helpfully shows Precious where the classroom is for the GED prep course that she'll be attending with a bunch of other troubled teenagers. The first class activity is for each student to give their name, place of birth, favorite color, something they do well, and why they are here. So Joe, why don't we do that? Start with you.
First name, Joe. Place of birth, Brooklyn. Favorite color, blue. Well, that's something I do well. Fucking, no. Sorry. Something I do well. Podcast. Oh, really? Oh, fuck you. And why are they here? I'm here because I met this white man, and we said, hey, let's do a podcast together. Technically, not the first white man I've done a podcast with, actually.
Nope. And I am George. I was born in Oceanside, New York. My favorite color is blue also. Something that I do well is analogize. And I'm here because Joe is a really good partner for accountability when you say that you want to do something with him. Podcast never would have gotten off the ground if Joe hadn't bugged me again and again, which wasn't bugging me. It was just reminding me that I said, hey, I'm going to do this thing.
That's right. So, folks, if you hate this podcast, it's my fault.
Yeah, it's Joe's fault. So, one of the students has fluorescent beige as a favorite color, which I didn't realize was a joke until I looked it up. They are each given a marble composition notebook that they are told they will write in every day and will have written correspondence with Miss Rain from every day. Then they do 15 minutes of free writing, which would sound like torture to 16-year-old me, but now I would see as an opportunity to either rant about something or get some thoughts out of my head so I can examine them without being stuck in a loop. They're called up to the board to write letters of the alphabet in turn, with each being mildly picked on by the other classmates. When Precious goes for the letter F, one of them says that F is for fat. I know I haven't described Precious's appearance in any great detail, but this is one criticism, while unnecessarily cruel, that is not exactly untrue.
Well, she does steal a bucket of chicken from a restaurant.
Yeah.
She's pretty big.
Precious takes it super personal and starts slapping that student around. Miss Rain breaks them up and then kicks the insult thrower out because she is not Shorzy and will not call the one who retaliates every time. Next, we see some one-on-one tutoring with Miss Rain, and it occurs to me that the concept of each one teach one is incompatible with the concept of a one teacher to multiple student setup. Even with a smaller than usual class size. Like, the whole idea is to form that singular bond and share the knowledge with one who lacks it, and one-on-one is the best ratio of teacher-student attention that can make that happen. Miss Rain is trying to help Precious read the title of a story, A Day at the Shore. Precious has trouble with this because Mary's voice and Carl's existence loom as large distractions for her. She does her best to push past that. Back at home, Mary tells Precious to get herself down to the welfare office to start bringing some money in since her new school status somehow interrupted their welfare checks. Mary is 100% abuse in an angry woman package. You're lying. You think you're too good for welfare. If I die of starvation, where will you go? You can't learn shit. That kind of stuff. Precious cooks dinner, every night, and tonight, Mary decides to be an asshole critic about it, making her daughter eat it in front of the TV the way Mary does.
Because she didn't like the way it was prepared.
Yeah. Eventually, Mary falls asleep in her chair. Precious stops to look at her before heading up to her room, and boy, if looks could kill.
By the way, just tacking on to our last film, which was...
To Wong Fu, thanks for everything, Julie Newmar.
Yes. Patrick Swayze cures everything by beating up the abusive husband. Do you think if he had walked in now and just beat up Mary, this would have solved everything?
The solution to everything in this movie does start with somebody beating the shit out of Mary. I'm not wrong.
I would start with Carl.
Well, if he's around.
Yes.
Down at the welfare office, I knew I recognized Mrs. Weiss, but I didn't expect it to be Mariah Carey. Turns out, she's a decent actor. I found myself buying her, a multi-platinum singer, as a social worker. I don't know, Joe. How did you...
Oh, she's fine. She's fine in it. Yeah,
okay. This is where we first learn any real details about Precious's first child, Keisha, who has Down syndrome and is cared for by Grandma Tootsie. We flash back to a recent visit from the other social worker. Mary holds Keisha and tells the social worker all of the right things. Of course she's been looking for a job, but nobody calls back. Oh yes, they took little Keisha to the doctor just last month. No, that's not a microwave, it's a toaster oven. The only non-lie in the bunch was about the toaster. Everything else could have been true. It just wasn't.
What did you think of that scene?
When we got locked out in 2012 and I was drawing unemployment, one of the requirements of drawing unemployment was that you be looking for a job. I was one of the only people that I'm aware of who actually did that during the lockout. I don't know if that answers your question, Joe.
Well, that isn't actually what I was referring to. What I was thinking of is more, because the mother is in that scene, if I'm not mistaken, right? The grandmother?
Yep.
Yeah. And this is when I had my question, what would later be answered, was like, why doesn't Precious just live with her grandmother? And of course, we find out that why that is.
Grandmother's a shit. Yeah.
Well, not only that, because apparently the grandmother is afraid of the mother, which I don't know why that would mean she couldn't take Precious in, but whatever. They do answer it, or at least give an answer to why that doesn't happen. The thing I found very curious about that scene is not only is she shitty to that child, but since Mary's so obsessed with the welfare check, she would have more money if that kid was there, so why not just have the kid there? It's not like she's going to take care of it.
According to the welfare office, the kid is there.
I know, but why go through this ruse? Just have the kid there.
Because then you have to deal with the kid.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't deal with anything.
Yeah, but that kid's going to have demands and make noises and shit. Like,
I guess.
She'd end up killing that kid.
Huh. Well, she does nearly to one of them anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Don't get me wrong, Grandma Tootsie is a horrible human being, but any child is safer with her than with her daughter.
Yeah, Tootsie's main problem seems to be really fucked up ideology and not standing up to her daughter and like, well, I'm taking these kids if you're not going to take care of them. What she could do?
Back in Miss Weiss's office, Precious is asked to talk about Carl. She slips up, mentioning the assaults, but then backtracks out of fear. She pivots to a rather good story about vampires that she could absolutely in 1987 have crafted into something profitable. Aim it at middle-aged soccer moms and make them sparkly. They'll fall all over themselves for it. Then she can't lie anymore, which doesn't really do anything except end the welfare payments to the household she still has to live in.
Which makes absolutely no sense.
Nope.
How does that fix anything? She still needs to eat. She still needs to feed her children.
Well, Joe, in a better world, what should have happened is that Mary and Carl get arrested and Precious takes over the lease with her own welfare income after being legally emancipated and finishes her GED. Like, welfare shouldn't stop there. It should kick in there to the victim and help solve the problem.
Oh, makes sense.
Class goes on a field trip to a museum. Another student gets spooked and grabs Precious's hand, and she narrates this as an interesting experience because she's never had someone just grab her hand like that before. We get a brief, mostly Black history montage. Precious seems happy to be in school and happy to be writing. The class shares fairy tales that they wrote. One gets up and reads about going to church as a fairy tale. I think I get it. Then it's baby time.
And before you move on, it makes sense that she would enjoy school because look how her home life is like. I only read about this. I don't know how successful it was. They stopped doing it, but I know that apparently during World War II, schools were open 24 hours. Sorry, not during World War II, during was it the Depression or World War II?
It sounds like it would be the Depression.
The Depression, schools open 24 hours. I think we should go back to that. I think there are a lot of kids who are abused out there home life is pretty shitty and should have some institution that can protect them if we're not going to remove them completely from the house.
Good point, Joe. Now, when you're wheeling a pregnant person in labor on a gurney, who is going to tell that person to stop screaming? Nurse John, that's who. Nurse John is played by Lenny Kravitz.
Lenny Kravitz, like Mariah Carey, is also a singer, but unlike Mariah Carey, he never did a Christmas song that's played over and over again each year. He, like Mariah, also occasionally acts, but I've seen nothing he's done.
Are you gonna go my way?
When he does that to her, you gotta stop screaming. I thought that was a dream sequence for a second. It just seemed weird. Because you're right, who's saying that to somebody?
And the thing is, he's not like that at all after that.
No, he's not a terrible guy.
Precious delivers her second child, a boy, Abdul. Nurse John represents for male nurses to Precious's gaggle of schoolgirl visitors. Miss Rain and Precious correspond in the journal. There's a lot that could be said here. Suffice it to say that Precious is determined to do things the hard way. She wants to care for both Keisha and Abdul and finish school. Miss Rain pushes back against this, but it's ultimately Precious's decision.
Yeah, she thinks it'd be better for the kids if she just gave them up.
Yep.
Which...
So does Miss Weiss.
Yeah, well, what do you think?
Yeah, I fucking do. I had a lot written there, and I realized the summary was getting really fucking long, and I'm like, cut it all. Like, one of the things she says is, I know what my baby needs, and I can provide for those needs. And then she suckles the child. Like, but Precious, milk is not the only thing that child needs. The amount of time and attention and money that a child needs in order to thrive is incompatible with a teenager trying to go to school. 2 children is even more impossible. She is setting herself up for failure out of a misguided understanding of what it takes to be a parent, because in her experience, parents don't have to do anything and the kids just kind of survive anyway.
And it's not even just that she has 2 kids. One of them is developmentally disabled, so that's going to be even more pressure on her.
Precious is discharged from the hospital, and as someone whose first child was born in 2001, it was a bit shocking to see her holding Abdul in the car instead of in a proper car seat. I noted that Precious, Miss Weiss, and Miss Rain all ask really good questions. Mary, on the other hand, does not.
You had the baby. Boy, where you been all this time?
In the fucking hospital! I yelled that during the movie, and it startled my cat.
Yes. I mean, they really, really go out of the way to make this woman just awful. Like, where were you at? You know where I was at. Oh, you had the baby. Yeah, that's what happens when you're pregnant and you don't terminate the pregnancy and the kid comes along.
To be fair, remember earlier when I mentioned that Precious slipped up and mentioned something? Mm-hmm. What she mentioned was giving birth to Keisha on the floor in the kitchen with her father kicking her head in.
Yes.
So their family's idea of where you give birth might be skewed as well.
Well, that's another thing that, again, the state would become involved with that. Because suddenly there's this teenager and she's got to register that kid someplace at some point. They're going to wonder, where this child come from? The fact she had it at the home doesn't matter. She's going to bring him out of the home. I don't know. The more questions would have been asked before it ever got to the point that it does in this picture. As bad as the system is, it's not that bad. Someone would have been asking something.
Mary, while smoking a cigarette, asks to hold Abdul, while Precious goes to the kitchen to make food. After a few seconds, Mary dumps Abdul onto a chair and then throws a shattery thing at Precious.
I thought she dropped the kid on the floor.
No, she dropped him onto the armchair that was right across from her.
Okay.
I have no problem believing that Mary would have dropped him on the floor. I think when they were making the movie, they were like, that would be too far. Audiences would walk out.
Yeah.
Then Precious does what she has never done before. She fights back. She even holds her own pretty damn well, and is able to grab Abdul and escape. It was a lot of stairs to get up to that apartment, and I knew they'd be treacherous, and was proven right when Precious slips and tumbles down holding Abdul. Jesus fucking Christ, that was like another moment.
Yes, I know, yeah.
But both are miraculously okay, which, of course, Mary tries to fix by throwing a television down the stairwell at them. She misses, again, but how about that foreshadowing?
Yes.
Not knowing where else to go, Precious breaks into her school and waits until morning for Miss Rain to show up.
See? School should be 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. When she does, she starts making phone calls looking for someplace for Precious and Abdul to stay. When the rest of the class arrives, they're directed to start teaching themselves so that the search can continue. Joe, you and Joanne could get along great if she was 30 years older. You both think babies in horrible situations are hilarious.
Wait, which one was Joanne again?
The one that kept laughing about why is there a baby in a bloody blanket?
Because the baby wasn't bleeding. Why is it still in the blanket? That actually is a good question. Good question, Joanne.
Precious and Abdul spend Christmas with Miss Rain and her girlfriend. That Miss Rain is a lesbian is utterly and completely shocking to the child since, and I mean of course, on top of being an enabler and perpetuator of child abuse, Mary is also a vocal and unabashed homophobe.
Why peoples that barely know me could be nicer to me than my mother and my father?
God damn, Precious, that's a good question.
Good question, Precious.
Sometime later, Precious is living in a halfway house, which she optimistically sees as someplace safe, halfway between the horrors of her past and what she wants for a future. She wins a literacy award, which includes a cash prize that she uses to throw a party. We even see her reading to Abdul and working with him in a pool. Then, Mary visits to tell her that Carl is dead. What did he die of? AIDS. Because it's the late 80s, and that's how that goes.
You got it?
Got what?
The AIDS virus.
No.
How you know?
We never did it up in the ass, so I know.
What do you think of that, George? It's like someone woke up one day like, I wonder if I can write the worst mother character ever.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can do it.
Yeah.
And tops herself every time. Sapphire, you did a hell of a job.
Pretty fucking great, yeah.
Yeah.
If that was the goal, nailed it. Precious gets an HIV test, and there's a bit of a monologue from Miss Rain as she teaches class focusing on the word relentless, which is a good descriptor of the trials in Precious's life. And because of that monologue, I had to avoid using the word relentless in the entire summary up until now, when there were lots of places I wanted to describe her life as just being relentless in terms of the trials that she faced. Precious tells Miss Rain and her classmates that she's HIV positive and has to be told that what her parents did to her was not love, and that Miss Rain, her class, and Precious's children all do love her.
And again, I mean, look, maybe this is just, I've watched one too many sitcoms growing up, but would a hug been outrageous at that point? A group hug? I don't know. Somebody needs to hug this poor child. Just one hug.
Precious tells Miss Weiss that she has HIV, and they chit-chat for a bit. When Miss Weiss gets up to go get a soda, Precious steals her own case file. In class, she reveals that the file shows that the welfare system wants her in workfare. Basically, to qualify for welfare benefits, she'd have to work as a homemaid for what amounts to peanuts. Her and the other students all agree that that's bullshit. So do I, for what it's worth.
So do I.
In the final moments of the film, we see Miss Weiss mediating a meeting between Mary and Precious to determine if Precious and her children will return to Mary's care. I should have put that in scare quotes. As soon as Mary said, they belong to me, there should have been an instant, no, people don't belong to people. If that's the first thing out of your mouth, then we don't need to hear anything else. You're going to be issued a restraining order and charged with the fraud you've been perpetuating, as well as the sexual assault you engaged in and the sexual assault you were an accessory to.
No one threatens to call the police on this woman once, even though she sure deserves it.
Instead, Mary is allowed to prattle on about how Scorpios are untrustworthy after not remembering what season, much less month, Precious was born. Basically, the answer is no, because Mary is a monster, and the monstrousness of her monsterhood is inexcusable no matter how the fuck she got there.
So you're not gonna play the monologue she does about who she is and what she became?
Nope, I sure am not, Joe. I don't want to hear it again.
You don't give a fuck. You don't forgive her nothing.
Nope. She can step on all the hot metal Legos. Precious and her children leave Miss Vice office and leave the building and enter into the world that they're going to navigate together from then on. The end.
All right, buddy. Does this film still work?
If this movie worked in the first place, it still works.
If it worked in the first place, what does that mean? You don't think it initially did?
If there's something about this film that makes it not work, it's not the passage of time.
I see. Right.
Right? This is a 2009 movie about 1987 that we're reviewing in 2022.
Yes.
As far as a movie in 1987, I definitely believe it's a movie set in 1987. That part's fine. I hate that I believe that a character could exist like this in the real world. I think that people can be horrible enough and treat children like this. I hate that I think that. But it's also not supposed to be based on a true story. And because of that, it doesn't have to be realistic. It looks to me like a worst case scenario in many ways. And it's not. It's not the worst case. It could have been worse. We mentioned some ways, like she could have turned to substance abuse to cope with all this bullshit. The fact that she imagines herself as famous and happy is fucking miraculous. So, if anything, it does get people thinking. It got me thinking. How likely is this? What would I do if I heard about something like this? In what ways should the welfare system be responding to cries for help and people in trouble? Like, I think it's a good thought-provoking film for all of its, oh my fucking God, really? Yeah, so basically, yeah, I think it works.
Okay. I'm going to agree with you on that. I do think it still works. It's a film I would like to not see again.
Oh, yes, 100%. I never want to see this again.
I have not seen it in years, and I put it on the list, so bad on me.
Yeah, this was your fault, Joe.
This is my fault. I forgot just how horrific this picture.
This was worse than Blue Velvet, Joe.
Because it was so much realer.
Mm-hmm.
I think the depictions of the welfare system as creating dependency, where a woman could just literally just sit in her home all day and watch TV while she abuses her kid, is inaccurate. Although obviously there are people who have had horrific things happening who are poor and who have been on welfare. It just said as someone who's been in a situation, nothing like obviously Precious has been through, but who's been in like a poor family on welfare, blah, 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 went to shitty public schools, all this sort of stuff. The bleakness this picture paints is just a bit much. And granted, look, I was a boy. My situation may have been different if I was a girl, especially got pregnant. Although my sister got pregnant in high school, and she's married woman now living in the South. So I don't know. It's just difficult to some of the depictions in the film for me of its realism and just people thinking, well, that's how it really is. I'm like, maybe not. But as you say, the film doesn't say it's a documentary. And even the woman who wrote it says it's fiction, although it's based on some things that happened to her. She was molested as a child as well. Yeah, it just brings up a lot of thoughts for me. But as a film, I think it works. I think the acting is all very good. And as I said, I will never see this again.
Yeah, exactly. I'll sign on that last point again, too. All of the acting in this was fine. Like, I believed every single character was who they were representing in this movie. Like, they all played their parts really well in this horror show of a fucking universe that they were supposed to exist in. Like, it won awards, and it deserved awards.
Yes, agree.
Yeah.
All right, buddy, what's up next?
Our next episode is a Patron's Choice episode. The patrons have chosen The Fisher King from 1991, beating out The Piano Teacher from 2001 and The Lincoln Lawyer from 2011. If you want to vote but are not a patron, you can fix that by becoming one at patreon.com/DTSWpod.
Do you know what The Fisher King is about? Because I actually have never seen it.
Me neither.
Okay,
It sounded like one of those boring movies that I never wanted to watch.
It's your favorite actors in it, though. So I'm surprised you didn't see it. This is the
Hanks?
Robin Williams movie, right?
Oh, Rob, no, I don't know. I don't know anything about it, Joe. I checked to see it was streaming. That was it. If I haven't seen the movie, I try not to learn anything about it until I go to watch it.
Okay. Well, then what are you blaming me that you didn't know anything about Precious?
You wrote it in the cold open. I didn't.
Yeah, I know. Those are all my words putting in your mouth. Anyway, so I guess that's it for this episode. I'm Joe Dixon. Thanks for listening. I was going to say vote blue, but you did. Thank you, America.
Yes, thank you for turning the red wave into just some light spotting.
God, everyone has done that joke.
I know. And I'm George Romacka. Thanks for listening indeed, because if a podcast drops and there's no one around to hear it, it's just another collection of ones and zeros that doesn't matter. I should have told you to watch Lord of the Rings before I did this ending clip, but whatever. The audience will understand it.
Precious.
Ellen! Precious! Get down here, bitch!
You've been listening to Does This Still Work? Produced by Joe Dixon and George Romacka. The hosts can be reached via social media, email, or the contact page at dtswpod.com. Be good to yourself and others, because that still works.
And we get a brief, mostly Black History massage.
I'd love one. What do you like more of? Free time, recognition, or money?
What do you think the best way to resolve conflict is?
George, would you rather be a lonely genius or a sociable idiot?
Do you feel that you have a healthier relationship with social media?